The blood-red sunset painted the Colorado sky as Florence Ashford kneeled beside the dying Cheyenne boy, his breathing labored and skin burning with fever. At 22, she'd already earned a reputation in Silverdale for her healing skills, but this time was different. This time, someone was watching. "What in God's name are you doing, Florence?" Her father's voice cut through the still evening air like a bullwhip. The distinguished doctor. Thomas Ashford stood rigid in his pristine suit, horror etched across his features as he witnessed his daughter applying herbal poultices to a Native American child. "Saving a life," Florence answered, not looking up from her work. Her fingers continued their methodical movement, pressing the mixture of crushed yarrow and echinacea against the infected wound on the boy's leg. "He'll die without treatment. You bring that savage into our home." Dr. Ashford's face contorted with rage and disgust. "After everything I've taught you about proper medicine," Florence finally met her father's gaze. "Your proper medicine wouldn't help him. The infection has spread too far for your bleeding and mercury treatments." She turned back to the child. "These remedies work. I've seen them work dozens of times. Heathen practices, witchcraft," Dr. Ashford spat. "Where did you learn such nonsense?" From Spotted Elk's grandmother. "She's taught me what plants heal, what combinations." "Enough," Dr. Ashford thundered. "I've overlooked your peculiarities, Florence. Your refusal to marry suitable men, your insistence on wearing those practical clothes instead of proper dresses, your endless questions about my medical practices. But this," he gestured wildly at the boy on her bed, "this is beyond tolerance." The boy's mother, a young Cheyenne woman named Morning Star, stood silently in the corner, her eyes downcast but her posture proud. She understood English well enough to know what was happening. Florence wrapped the boy's leg in clean linen. "Father, please. He's just a child." "You have until morning," Dr. Ashford said, his voice deadly calm. "Either you cease this primitive foolishness and recommit yourself to proper society and proper medicine, or you are no longer my daughter." The door slammed behind him, leaving Florence in stunned silence. Morning Star stepped forward. "We go, bring trouble to kind woman." "No," Florence said firmly. "Little Wolf needs rest and the treatment needs time to work." She smiled reassuringly. "You're safe here tonight." When dawn broke over the eastern plains, Florence had made her decision. She stood in the parlor facing her father, her spine straight, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the ornate furnishings. "I cannot abandon what I know to be true," she said. "These remedies work. The Cheyenne have knowledge we should learn from, not scorn." Her father's face hardened like granite. "Then you are no daughter of mine. Take your possessions and leave my house." "Thomas," Florence's mother gasped from the doorway. "Surely you don't mean—" "I do," he cut her off. "No daughter of mine consorts with savages or practices their pagan medicine." Florence's younger sister wept openly, but no one moved to defend her as Florence climbed the stairs to pack her meager belongings. An hour later, she stood on the porch of the home she'd known her entire life, a carpetbag in one hand and her father's final words ringing in her ears. "You are dead to this family." Little Wolf and Morning Star had slipped away before sunrise, the boy already showing signs of improvement. Florence took one last look at the grand house and turned away. She had nowhere to go, but her heart felt surprisingly light. Truth was worth the cost. 3 days later, Florence found herself in the back room of Silverdale's general store, treating the owner's wife for a persistent cough. Word had spread quickly that she was no longer under her father's protection, but also that her remedies worked when conventional medicine failed. "Mrs. Patterson, you need to continue this tea 3 times daily," Florence explained, handing the older woman a small cloth sack of dried herbs. "The whorehound will ease your breathing." The bell over the shop door jangled, and Mr. Patterson's voice rose in greeting. "Mr. Zachary, didn't expect to see you in town this month." Florence gathered her supplies, half listening to the conversation in the main shop. "Cattle drive finished early. Brought some boys in for supplies," a deep voice answered. "Got word there's a healer in town who might look at my foreman's shoulder. Took a bad fall last week and it ain't healing proper." Florence stepped through the curtain into the main store, where she found herself looking up quite a ways up into the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man before her stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. His dark hair curled slightly at the edges of his Stetson, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a strong jawline. "Miss Ashford," Mr. Patterson said, "this here's Jake Zachary. Owns the Big Sky Ranch west of here." Jake Zachary's eyes widened slightly. "Ashford, the doctor's daughter." "Former daughter," Florence corrected, lifting her chin. "I practice a different kind of medicine now." Something like interest flickered across Jake's features. "Madam," he said with a slight tip of his hat, "I've got a man with a bad shoulder. Dislocated it, we think. Set it back, but it's swollen something fierce and he can barely move it." "I can take a look," Florence said. "Where is he?" "Outside. Name's Hank." Jake gestured toward the door. "If you wouldn't mind." Florence followed him outside, where a group of dusty cowboys stood or sat around 2 wagons loaded with supplies. An older man with a gray-streaked beard sat on a barrel, his left arm held protectively against his body. "This the healer, boss?" Hank asked, eyeing Florence skeptically. "Miss Ashford," Jake confirmed. Florence approached without hesitation. "May I examine your shoulder, Mr. Hank?" The cowboys exchanged glances, but Hank nodded. Florence gently probed the swollen joint, noting the heat and discoloration. "The joint is back in place, but there's significant inflammation," she diagnosed. "How long ago did this happen?" "About 6 days back," Hank answered. Florence opened her medicine bag and pulled out several items. "I need hot water," she said to no one in particular. Jake immediately dispatched one of his men to fetch water from the saloon across the street. While they waited, Florence prepared a mixture of willow bark, arnica, and comfrey. "What's all that?" Jake asked, watching her work. "Plants with properties that reduce swelling and pain," Florence explained. "The Cheyenne showed me how to prepare them properly." Jake's eyebrow rose. "Indians taught you doctoring?" "Yes." Florence met his gaze directly, waiting for the disgust or dismissal she'd grown accustomed to. "Do you have a problem with that, Mr. Zachary?" To her surprise, Jake shrugged. "If it works, it works. Got no quarrel with the Cheyenne myself. Several work for me during Roundup." The water arrived and Florence finished preparing her remedy. She made a hot compress for Hank's shoulder and left him with additional herbs for tea. "He needs rest," she told Jake. "That arm shouldn't be used for at least another week." Jake rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "That's going to be a problem. We're short-handed as it is." "Then he'll re-injure it and it could become permanently weakened," Florence said firmly. Jake nodded slowly. "What do I owe you, Miss Ashford?" Florence named a modest sum, which Jake paid without complaint. As she tucked the coins into her pocket, she became uncomfortably aware that she had nowhere to sleep that night. The room above the general store where she'd been staying was needed for a traveling salesman. "You got someplace to go, Miss Ashford?" Jake asked suddenly, his perceptive eyes studying her face. Florence hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "I'm between accommodations at the moment." Jake's expression remained neutral. "Heard about your situation. Town's talking." "I imagine they are," Florence said dryly. "Got plenty of room at my ranch," Jake said casually. "Could use someone with your skills. Hands are always getting banged up and we're 15 miles from town. Florence stared at him. You're offering me employment, room, board, and a fair wage, Jake confirmed. Plus, there's something you should know. He lowered his voice. Got a small group of Cheyenne living on my north pasture. Chief Red Horse and his band, about 30 of them. Government tried to force them to the reservation, but I worked out an arrangement. They keep to themselves mostly, but they could use medical attention now and again. Florence's heart quickened. And you don't mind them being there. It's my land, Jake said simply. I decide who stays on it. For the first time in days, Florence felt hope blossoming in her chest. When do we leave? Jake's slow smile transformed his face. Right now, if you're ready. 2 hours later, Florence found herself perched on the seat of a wagon beside Jake Zachary, heading west out of Silverdale. Her entire life had been confined to the town and surrounding farms, so each mile they traveled represented uncharted territory. The late May sun warmed her shoulders, and the scent of sage and prairie grass filled the air. How large is your ranch, Mr. Zachary? She asked, breaking the companionable silence that had settled between them. Just Jake, please, he replied. And it's about 12,000 acres, not as big as some, but it's good land with reliable water. Florence tried to imagine such a vast expanse belonging to one person. And you run cattle, Jake nodded. About 2,000 head of Hereford-Durham crosses, built up the herd over the past 8 years. You've accomplished a great deal for someone so young, Florence observed. Jake couldn't be much more than 30. A shadow passed over his features. Started with my father's herd. He and my mother died of typhoid when I was 22. I just kept building on what they started. I'm sorry, Florence said softly. Jake adjusted the reins in his calloused hands. Life out here takes as often as it gives. You learn to keep moving forward. He glanced at her, like you're doing now. Florence appreciated that he didn't express pity. Yes, though I admit this wasn't how I envisioned my future unfolding. How did you envision it? Jake asked. Florence considered the question. I always expected to work alongside my father, learning proper medicine. But the more I studied with him, the more questions I had. Why bleed patients who are already weak? Why administer toxic mercury compounds that cause more harm than good? And the Indians had better answers. In many cases, yes, Florence said passionately. Their knowledge of plant remedies is vast and precise, and they truly observe how the body responds. They don't just follow dogma. Jake seemed to absorb this thoughtfully. When did you start learning from them? 3 years ago. A Cheyenne woman came to town to trade, and her son fell ill with fever. My father refused to treat them, so I followed them back to their camp, bringing what medicines I could. The boy's grandmother, White Buffalo woman, saw my interest and began teaching me. The wagon crested a hill, and Florence gasped at the vista that spread before them. A wide valley opened up, bisected by a gleaming ribbon of river. In the distance, a collection of buildings nestled against the backdrop of pine-covered foothills. Big Sky Ranch, Jake announced with quiet pride. As they drew closer, Florence could make out the details. A substantial 2-story main house built of squared logs, a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Corrals and fenced pastures extended outward, and cattle dotted the landscape. It was an impressive operation, speaking of years of hard work and careful management. It's beautiful, Florence said sincerely. Jake's pleased expression was almost boyish. Been adding to it every year. Just finished the new wing on the main house last winter. They rolled into the yard where a gray-haired woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Cooper, Jake called. Got ourselves a healer. This is Miss Florence Ashford. Mrs. Cooper's weathered face broke into a smile. About time. "Welcome, Miss Ashford. I'm Martha Cooper, housekeeper and cook." Florence was shown to a comfortable bedroom in the east wing of the house. The room was simply but tastefully furnished, with a bed, dresser, washstand, and a small writing desk beneath a window that looked out over the valley. After days of uncertainty, the security of having a roof over her head brought tears to her eyes. "Dinner's at 6, Mrs. Cooper informed her. "The hands eat in the bunkhouse, but Mr. Zachary takes his meals in the dining room. He said you're to join him, being as you're not hired help but more of a professional resident." Florence was grateful for the distinction. It would help establish her position among the ranch workers and ensure her healing practice was taken seriously. After freshening up, Florence made her way downstairs. She found Jake in what appeared to be a study, bent over a large desk covered with papers. "Cattle tallies," he explained when he noticed her in the doorway. "Spring calving was good this year." "Your operation seems very successful," Florence said, stepping into the room. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprising her with their eclectic contents. Volumes on cattle breeding and ranch management sat alongside works of Shakespeare, Thoreau, and other literary masters. Jake followed her gaze and smiled slightly. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She insisted the frontier was no excuse for an uneducated mind." "A wise woman," Florence commented, running her fingers along the spines. "You have quite a collection of botanical references." Those were hers too. She had an interest in plants and their properties. Nothing like your knowledge, I'm sure, but she kept a medicinal garden. Jake stood, stretching his tall frame. "It's overgrown now, but it's still there behind the house. You're welcome to restore it if you'd like." Before Florence could respond, Mrs. Cooper announced dinner. They moved to the dining room where a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread awaited them. "Tomorrow, if you're agreeable," Jake said as they ate, "I'll take you to meet Chief Red Horse and his people. They've set up a permanent camp by Willow Creek about 3 miles north." Florence nodded eagerly. "I'd like that very much." "They're cautious around strangers with good reason," Jake warned. "But they trust me and they're in need of medical attention. Their healer died last winter." "How did they come to be on your land?" Florence asked, curious about the unusual arrangement. Jake's expression darkened. "Army was forcing them to the reservation in Wyoming Territory. Conditions there are brutal, poor land, inadequate supplies. Red Horse's band includes several elderly and children. They wouldn't have survived." He paused. "My father taught me to judge men by their character, not where they were born or the color of their skin. When Red Horse approached me about sanctuary, I couldn't turn them away." "That was courageous," Florence said softly. "Most ranchers wouldn't risk the controversy." Jake shrugged. "I own the land outright. No bank loans to worry about, and my cattle operation is successful enough that I can weather some criticism. Besides," he added with a wry smile, "I'm far enough from town that most people mind their own business." "Except when you hire disgraced healers," Florence pointed out. Jake's blue eyes met hers directly. "I don't consider you disgraced, Miss Ashford. I consider you principled." "That's a rare quality." Florence felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. For the first time since leaving her father's house, she felt truly vindicated in her choices. The next morning dawned clear and bright. After breakfast, Jake saddled 2 horses, a steady bay gelding for Florence and a powerful black stallion for himself. "Can you ride?" he asked as he adjusted the bay's stirrups. "Yes, though it's been some time," Florence admitted. "My father considered it unladylike to ride astride rather than side saddle." Jake's mouth quirked. "No side saddles here, I'm afraid, just regular ranch tack." "Good," Florence said firmly. "Side saddles are impractical and dangerous." They rode north across rolling grassland dotted with spring wildflowers. Florence breathed deeply, savoring the sense of freedom. Her hair was braided and tucked under a wide-brimmed hat Jake had lent her, and she wore her most practical dress, with a split skirt that allowed for comfortable riding. "There," Jake said eventually, pointing toward a grove of cottonwoods and willows that marked the course of a stream. As they drew closer, Florence could make out the conical shapes of tipis arranged in a semicircle. They were spotted well before they reached the camp. Two mounted braves appeared suddenly from a stand of trees, rifles across their laps. They recognized Jake immediately and nodded in greeting, but their eyes remained wary as they assessed Florence. "Young bull, gray fox," Jake greeted them in English. "I've brought a healer to help your people. She is knowledgeable in plant medicine." The men exchanged glances, then young bull spoke. "Chief waiting." He turned his horse and led them toward the camp. As they approached, Florence saw that the small band had created a permanent settlement rather than a temporary camp. In addition to the traditional tipis, there were several more durable structures, small cabins made of logs and earth. Gardens had been planted, and racks held drying meat. Children played near the stream while women worked at various tasks. All activity paused as they rode in. Florence felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. A tall, dignified man emerged from the largest tipi. Though probably in his 60s, Chief Red Horse stood straight and proud, his face deeply lined with wisdom and hardship. He wore a mixture of traditional Cheyenne clothing and European items, buckskin leggings with a calico shirt, his long gray hair braided with strips of red cloth. Jake dismounted and approached him with respect, speaking a few words in Cheyenne before switching to English. "I've brought a healer, as I promised. This is Miss Florence Ashford." Florence slid from her horse and stepped forward, holding the chief's gaze respectfully. "I am honored to meet you, Chief Red Horse." The chief studied her for a long moment. "You know our medicine ways?" he asked in accented but clear English. "White Buffalo Woman began teaching me," Florence answered. "I have much still to learn, but I understand the principles and know many remedies." Red Horse's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the respected healer. "White Buffalo Woman was my cousin. She died 2 winters ago." "I'm sorry," Florence said sincerely. "She was a wise teacher." The chief nodded slowly, then turned toward a small cabin. "Come, many sick need medicine." Florence followed him, while Jake remained outside, apparently familiar enough with the camp to engage in conversation with some of the men. Inside the cabin, Florence found 3 patients: an elderly woman with a persistent cough, a young mother with an infected hand, and a little boy of perhaps 5 with a high fever. Working methodically, Florence examined each patient, asking questions through Red Horse, who translated when necessary. She opened her medicine bag and began preparing treatments, explaining each step to the chief. "The boy has a throat infection," she told Red Horse. "This tea will reduce his fever, and this poultice will draw out the sickness. The old woman needs something to ease her breathing and strengthen her lungs. For the young mother, we must clean the wound properly and make a drawing paste for the infection." For the next 2 hours, Florence worked steadily. As word spread through the camp, more people came seeking treatment for various ailments: joint pain, digestive troubles, old injuries that hadn't healed properly. Florence addressed each case with calm efficiency, combining her formal medical knowledge with the herbal wisdom she'd learned from White Buffalo Woman. When she finally emerged from the cabin, the sun was high overhead. Jake sat under a cottonwood tree, deep in conversation with Red Horse and 2 other elders. He rose when he saw her. "How did it go?" he asked. "There's much to be done," Florence said. Many minor ailments, but also some more serious conditions. The elderly woman falling water has consumption. I've given her remedies to ease her symptoms, but she shook her head. Some diseases had no cure in either European or native medicine. Red Horse approached her. You have good hands, good heart. Come again soon. I will come twice each week, Florence promised. And I'll leave medicines for you to use between my visits. The chief nodded, satisfied. He turned to Jake and spoke at length in Cheyenne. Jake listened respectfully, occasionally responding in the same language. As they rode back toward the ranch, Florence's curiosity got the better of her. You speak Cheyenne, Jake nodded. Not fluently, but enough to get by. Learned as a boy. My father traded with the Cheyenne when they still moved freely through these territories. What did Red Horse say to you before we left? Jake's expression was difficult to read. He said you have medicine in your spirit as well as your hands. That's high praise from him. He paused. He also said I was wise to bring a woman who walks between worlds to the ranch. Between worlds, Florence echoed. Between white ways and native ways, Jake explained. He believes such people have special vision, they see truths others miss. Florence considered this thoughtfully. I've never thought of myself that way, but perhaps there's some truth to it. I've always felt caught between my father's rigid beliefs and what I observed actually worked. They rode in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. You were good with them, Jake said eventually. Natural, respectful without being condescending. They're simply people in need of help, Florence said. No different than anyone in town, except they've been treated abominably by those who should have protected them. Jake's eyes showed approval. Exactly so, though not many share that view. Back at the ranch, they found a visitor waiting Dr. Thomas Ashford himself, sitting stiffly in Jake's study. Florence froze in the doorway at the sight of her father. Florence, he said coldly, rising to his feet, I've come to bring you to your senses. Jake stepped protectively to Florence's side. Dr. Ashford, I don't believe you were invited to my home. The doctor's eyes flicked dismissively over Jake. This doesn't concern you, Zachary. I'm here for my daughter. Former daughter, Florence corrected, finding her voice. You made that distinction quite clear. Dr. Ashford's face reddened. Your mother and sister are distraught. This foolishness has gone on long enough. It's time to come home and resume your proper place. My proper place, Florence echoed. You mean silent and obedient, denying what I know to be true. I mean practicing civilized medicine instead of pagan rituals. Dr. Ashford exploded. Do you know what people are saying in town? That you've gone wild, living with savages, practicing witchcraft. Dr. Ashford, Jake cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. Miss Florence is employed here as a healer. She has private quarters in the main house and is treated with the utmost respect. Any suggestion otherwise would be unwise. The doctor's lip curled. So you found yourself a protector, Florence. How convenient. Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Zachary is my employer, nothing more. And I have no need of your approval or protection. I'm 22 years old and fully capable of making my own decisions, including the decision to ruin your reputation beyond repair, Dr. Ashford demanded. No decent man will marry you now. If a man won't have me because I follow my conscience and use effective medicine, then he isn't decent at all, Florence retorted. Jake stepped forward. I think you should leave, Dr. Ashford. Miss Florence has made her position clear. For a moment, Dr. Ashford looked as though he might argue further, but something in Jake's steady gaze made him reconsider. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. Your mother insisted I give you this, he said stiffly, holding it out to Florence. Against my better judgment. Florence took the envelope, recognizing her mother's handwriting. Thank you for delivering it. Without another word, Dr. Ashford strode from the house. Through the window, Florence watched him mount his horse and gallop away, his rigid posture conveying his continuing disapproval. "Are you all right?" Jake asked quietly when the doctor was out of sight. Florence nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her mother's letter. "Yes, I knew he wouldn't simply let the matter rest. My father has never tolerated defiance. Will you go back?" Jake asked, his tone carefully neutral. Florence met his eyes. "No, I can't abandon what I know to be right, and I can't abandon people who need help both at your ranch and in the Cheyenne camp." Something like relief flickered in Jake's expression. "Good. You belong here, Florence." The way he said her name the first time he'd used it without the formal miss sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. It felt like a threshold crossed, though she couldn't have explained exactly why. Later that evening, alone in her room, Florence opened her mother's letter. Inside, she found a brief note expressing love and concern, along with a small pouch containing several gold coins and her grandmother's silver locket. "To help you in your new life," her mother had written. "I may not understand your choices, but I will always love you. Be safe, my daughter." Florence clutched the locket to her chest, tears blurring her vision. The small token of support meant more than her mother could possibly know. Over the next few weeks, Florence settled into life at Big Sky Ranch. She established a treatment room in a small cabin near the main house, where ranch hands and occasional visitors from neighboring properties came for medical attention. Twice weekly, she rode to the Cheyenne camp, gradually earning the trust of even the most suspicious members of the band. She also discovered the overgrown medicinal garden behind the main house and set about restoring it with enthusiasm. Jake provided 2 ranch hands to help with the heavy work of clearing and preparing the soil, and soon the garden began to take shape. Florence planted herbs both familiar and exotic, creating a living pharmacy for her practice. Through it all, her relationship with Jake evolved from formal employer-employee to something approaching friendship. They often ate dinner together, discussing the day's events and sharing ideas. Florence discovered that beneath Jake's reserved exterior lay a thoughtful, well-read mind and a dry sense of humor that frequently caught her by surprise. One evening in late June, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. A comfortable silence had settled between them when Jake suddenly spoke. "Why did you never marry?" he asked, then immediately looked chagrined. "Forgive me, that's too personal a question." Florence smiled. "No, it's a fair question. The answer is simple. I never met anyone who saw me as I truly am. The men my father considered suitable viewed me as a decorative object to be possessed, not a thinking person with my own mind." Jake nodded slowly. "I understand that better than you might think." "You've never married either," Florence observed. "No, running this ranch doesn't leave much time for courting," Jake said with a slight smile. "And the women in town seem to want a different type of man than I am." "What type of man are you, Jake Zachary?" Florence asked softly. He considered the question, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "A simple one, I suppose. I believe in hard work, fairness, and leaving the world better than I found it. I have little patience for pretense or cruelty." He glanced at her. "Not very exciting, I'm afraid." "I find those qualities quite appealing," Florence said honestly. "Far more so than the artificial charm some men cultivate." Something shifted in Jake's eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. For a breathless moment, Florence thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he stood and stretched. "It's getting late," he said. "Tomorrow's a busy day. The cattle in the south pasture need moving." Florence nodded, feeling strangely disappointed. "Good night, Jake." "Good night, Florence." As July blazed across the Colorado plains, bringing searing heat and afternoon thunderstorms, life at Big Sky Ranch fell into a pleasant rhythm. Florence's practice flourished as word spread about her healing skills. Even some of the townspeople began to make the journey to the ranch, seeking remedies for ailments that conventional medicine couldn't address. One morning, Florence was gathering herbs in her garden when the sound of galloping hooves made her look up. One of the Cheyenne braves, young Bull, raced into the yard, his horse lathered with sweat. "Miss Florence," he called, spotting her. "Come quick, children very sick." Florence ran to meet him. "What's wrong? What symptoms?" "High fever, red spots, many children," young Bull explained urgently. "Two already died." Florence felt her blood run cold. Measles, it had to be measles, a disease devastating to native populations with no built-up immunity. "I'll come right away," she said. "Wait here." She rushed to her cabin, gathering supplies and medicines. As she worked, Jake appeared in the doorway, alerted by the commotion. "What's happening?" he asked. "Measles in the Cheyenne camp," Florence said grimly. "I need to go immediately." Jake's expression turned serious. "I'll come with you." "You don't need to." "I do," he interrupted. "If it's measles, you'll need help. It spreads fast." Florence couldn't argue with his logic. 20 minutes later, they were galloping north, saddlebags laden with supplies. The scene at the Cheyenne camp was worse than Florence had feared. Nearly a dozen children lay ill, along with several adults. Two small bodies, already wrapped for burial, lay in a separate tipi. For the next 3 days, Florence and Jake worked tirelessly, barely sleeping as they fought to contain the outbreak. Florence prepared fever-reducing teas, soothing salves for the rash, and special broths to keep the sick hydrated. Jake helped wherever needed, carrying water, building fires, holding delirious children so Florence could treat them. On the third night, as they sat exhausted by a fire, tending to a particularly ill little girl, Jake spoke quietly. "Where do you think it came from, the measles?" Florence sighed. "Probably a trader, someone who visited the camp recently." She dipped a cloth in cool water and placed it on the child's forehead. "This is why the government policy of displacement is so deadly. It's not just the direct violence, it's exposure to diseases their bodies have never encountered." Jake nodded somberly. "I've seen it before. When I was a boy, whooping cough tore through a Cheyenne band that camped near our ranch. Half their children died. The little girl between them stirred restlessly, moaning in her fever. Florence checked her pulse, relieved to find it stronger than before. "I think she's turning the corner," she said hopefully. Jake studied Florence's face in the firelight. "You're incredible," he said softly. "I've never seen anyone work with such determination." Florence felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "No," Jake shook his head. "It's more than that. You truly care. Not everyone does." Their eyes met across the small fire, and Florence felt something electric pass between them. For a moment, the chaos around them seemed to recede, leaving only this quiet connection. The moment broke when the little girl coughed, and Florence turned her attention back to her patient. But something had shifted between them, something neither could ignore. By the end of the week, the crisis had passed. They had lost 3 children and 1 elder to the disease, but the rest were recovering. Chief Red Horse called the band together for a ceremony to honor those who had died and to thank Florence and Jake for their help. "You are family now," he told them, placing his hands on their shoulders in blessing. "Black Eagle," he said to Jake, using the Cheyenne name they had given him years before. Then he turned to Florence. "And you are healing woman, our people will remember." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both Florence and Jake drained from the ordeal. As they approached the main house, Jake suddenly pulled his horse to a stop. Florence halted beside him. "What is it?" she asked. Jake turned in his saddle to face her, his expression intense. "I need to say something, Florence. Something I've been thinking about for weeks now." Florence's heart began to pound. "Yes. These past days, watching you work, seeing your courage and compassion." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "It made me realize something I think I've known since the day you arrived. You're extraordinary, and I find myself thinking about you all the time." Florence could scarcely breathe. "Jake, you don't have to say anything," he hastened to add. "I know it's sudden, and you're still establishing your independence, but I wanted you to know how I feel, how much I admire you, how much I've come to care for you." Florence studied his face, the earnest blue eyes, the strong features softened now with vulnerability. In that moment, she recognized that what had been growing between them was more than friendship or professional respect. "It's not sudden," she said softly. "Not for me. I've felt it too, Jake, since that day you stood up to my father, maybe even before." Joy bloomed across his features. "Florence," he whispered, and reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. The simple touch sent warmth cascading through her. This was nothing like the stilted courtship rituals she'd endured in town. This was real, born of shared purpose, mutual respect, and genuine affection. "May I court you properly?" Jake asked. "I know your situation is unusual, but—" Florence laughed, the sound bright in the evening air. "Jake Zachary, nothing about my life is conventional anymore. I think we're well beyond worrying about propriety." Jake smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Even so, I want to do this right." In the weeks that followed, their courtship unfolded with a sweet intensity that surprised them both. Despite their busy days, they found time for quiet moments together: horseback rides at sunset, walks along the river, evenings on the porch talking until the stars filled the sky. Jake proved to be a thoughtful suitor. He brought Florence wildflowers from the high pastures and books from his library that he thought might interest her. When a traveling peddler came through, Jake purchased ribbons for her hair and fine paper for her medical notes. But the true gift was his unwavering support of her work. He built additional shelves in her treatment cabin, expanded her garden, and even began learning about the medicinal plants she used so he could help gather them. By August, their feelings were clear to everyone at the ranch. Mrs. Cooper smiled knowingly when she found them lingering over breakfast, and the ranch hands exchanged good-natured glances when the boss rode out with the healer to check the north pasture, which somehow always took much longer than it should have. Even the Cheyenne noticed the change. When Florence made her regular visits to the camp, the women would smile and make teasing comments that didn't need translation. Young Bull once pantomimed shooting an arrow through his heart when Jake helped Florence down from her horse, causing the entire camp to erupt in laughter. One crisp September evening, Jake asked Florence to ride with him to a special place on the ranch, a high meadow overlooking the valley, where wildflowers still bloomed despite the approaching autumn. As the sun began its descent, painting the mountains with golden light, Jake took Florence's hands in his. "Florence Ashford," he said, his voice deep with emotion, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought healing not just to the people around us, but to me as well." He took a deep breath. "I love you. Will you marry me?" Florence felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Jake, I love you too." He kissed her then, tenderly at first, then with growing passion. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless. "I have something for you," Jake said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small leather pouch and emptied its contents into his palm, a ring of intricate silver work set with a deep blue stone. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slid it onto Florence's finger. The stone is lapis lazuli. She always said it reminded her of the Colorado sky. It's beautiful, Florence whispered, admiring how it caught the fading light. Jake drew her close again. I want you to know, Florence, marrying me doesn't mean giving up your independence or your work. I love who you are, and I would never ask you to change. Florence laid her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. I know, Jake. That's why I love you. They married on a golden October day, with the aspen trees blazing yellow against the blue mountains. The ceremony took place at the ranch. With a curious mixture of guests, ranch hands, and neighboring ranchers stood alongside members of Red Horse's band. Even Florence's mother and sister came, though her father remained conspicuously absent. Chief Red Horse performed a Cheyenne blessing alongside the Christian vows, symbolizing the bridge between worlds that the couple represented. As winter descended on the Colorado plains, Big Sky Ranch settled into a season of quiet contentment. Jake and Florence established their life together in the main house, their partnership extending from personal to professional as they worked side by side to manage the ranch and care for those who depended on them. In January, as snow blanketed the land, a letter arrived from Silverdale. Florence's father had suffered a stroke. He was alive but weakened, and her mother begged her to come. We should go, Jake said simply when Florence showed him the letter. The journey to town was difficult in the winter conditions, but they made it in 2 days. Florence found her father much changed, his right side paralyzed, his imperious manner subdued by illness. When she entered his sick room, he looked up with eyes that held resignation rather than anger. Florence, he said, his speech slightly slurred. You came. Of course, father. She sat beside his bed, Jake standing supportively behind her. Her father's gaze shifted to Jake, then back to Florence. I was wrong, he said with difficulty. About you, about your medicine. Florence felt tears spring to her eyes. Father, let me finish, he insisted. Your remedies, doctor. Wilson has been using them for my recovery. He gestured weakly to a tincture bottle on his bedside table. They work better than traditional treatments. It was as close to an apology as Thomas Ashford could manage, but Florence accepted it with grace. I'm glad they're helping you, father. Over the next week, a fragile reconciliation took shape. Florence worked with her father's doctor, sharing her knowledge while respecting his authority in his own practice. By the time she and Jake prepared to return to the ranch, her father's condition had improved significantly. Will you come back? Her mother asked anxiously as they prepared to depart. Florence glanced at Jake, who nodded slightly. Yes, mother, regularly, and perhaps in the summer you and father could visit the ranch. Her mother's face lit up at the invitation. We'd like that very much. As they rode away from Silverdale, Florence felt a sense of completion. Thank you, she said to Jake, for encouraging me to come, for standing beside me. Jake reached across to take her hand. Always, Florence, always. Spring brought new life to Big Sky Ranch, calves in the pastures, fresh growth in Florence's expanded garden, and the joyful news that Florence was expecting their first child. How do you feel about it? Jake asked one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. Florence smiled, covering his hand with her own. Happy, a little nervous, but mostly grateful that our child will grow up in this place, learning to respect all people and traditions. Our own little bridge between worlds, Jake murmured. In late November, as the first snow dusted the mountains, Florence gave birth to a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. They named him Thomas Jacob Zachary, honoring both their families. 2 weeks later, bundled against the winter chill, they brought the infant to the Cheyenne camp. Chief Red Horse, now growing frail himself, held the baby with reverent hands. strong spirit, he pronounced. He will walk in both worlds with honor. As Florence watched her husband take their son from the chief's arms, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the confines of her father's house to the freedom of this land, from rejection to acceptance, from solitude to a family bound by love and purpose. Jake caught her eye and smiled, the expression holding all the love and partnership they had built together. In that moment, Florence knew with absolute certainty that being disowned had not been an ending but a beginning, the first step on a path to where she truly belonged. By the following spring, Florence's parents had visited the ranch, her father moving slowly with a cane but clearly impressed by what his daughter and son-in-law had built. The sight of him holding his grandson, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence, healed wounds Florence had thought might never close. As the years passed, Big Sky Ranch prospered and grew. Florence and Jake welcomed 2 more children, a daughter, Martha Rose, and another son, William. Florence's healing practice became renowned throughout the territory, drawing people from hundreds of miles away seeking her unique combination of traditional and native medicine. The Cheyenne settlement on the North Pasture thrived as well, gradually expanding as relatives from the reservation joined them when possible. Florence worked closely with several young Cheyenne women, passing on both her European medical knowledge and the traditional wisdom white buffalo woman had shared with her. 10 years after Florence first arrived at Big Sky Ranch, Jake added a new building to the property, a proper clinic with multiple treatment rooms, an herbal dispensary, and quarters for patients who needed extended care. Above the door, a simple sign read, "Ashford Zachary Healing Center." On the day it opened, as they stood together surveying what they had created, Jake slipped his arm around Florence's waist. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked, gesturing toward the clinic, the thriving ranch, the peaceful coexistence they had fostered. Florence leaned against his solid strength, watching their children playing with the Cheyenne children near the garden she had planted that first summer. "No," she admitted. "When I left my father's house, I only knew what I couldn't do. I couldn't deny what I believed was right. I had no vision beyond that." "And now," Jake prompted. Florence turned to face him, placing her hands on his chest. His face was more weathered now, lines of experience etched around his eyes, but his gaze still held the same steadfast integrity that had captured her heart. "Now I see that standing for what's right was just the beginning," she said. "What matters is building something better in its place." She stretched up to kiss him softly. "Thank you for giving me the space to do that and for building it with me." Jake's arms tightened around her. "Always, my love. Always." As the Colorado sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Florence Ashford Zachary looked out over the land that had become her home and the community that had become her family. What had begun as rejection had transformed into something far more powerful, a life of purpose, healing, and love that bridged divided worlds and changed countless lives for the better. Being disowned had set her free, and Jake Zachary had given her a place to plant the seeds of that freedom and watch them grow.